morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant. We welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, the Kentucky Distillers Association talks about the 25th anniversary of the Bourbon Trail and the tremendous growth of that industry. Gregory joining us shortly. But first, Eastern Kentucky University President Dr. David McFaddin is here. EKU's campus about to come to life for a new year. The comprehensive regional university in Richmond boasts that nearly 8 out of 10 graduates are employed full-time within 6 months of graduation. It also bills itself as a school of opportunity, with 43% of its students first-generation college students, as was today's guest. The legislature gave EKU money for a new model lab school. Congressman Andy Barr recently announced money for the Central Kentucky Regional Airport, where Eastern's growing aviation program is based. President McFaddin is an Eastern graduate who has led his alma mater since 2019, and he's joining us. Welcome. Appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here, Bill, with a fellow EKU
there
alum.
You go. And in the middle of the summer, I know it's the quiet before the storm. It's kind of tranquil on campus right now, although I know a lot of work is going on. What does it feel like when that new academic year begins?
I don't know that, I'm not a traditional university president. I spent the early part of my careers in the private sector, and I don't think that everyone appreciates the rejuvenation and kind of the starting over that you get to do on a college campus. A new group of freshmen coming onto campus, returning students, alumni coming back. It's an exciting time, and so I think that it's just a really good time to be a part of the university. We're eager to get the semester started again, and boy, summer goes quick.
You know, it used to be that it was like, so you have your options and you choose a school. Universities, though, really now have a real role in this workforce development in Kentucky. Education, nursing, counseling. The country has a shortage of pilots, and those happen to be areas in which EKU is positioned well, given those specialty areas for the university, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that we think a lot about is, as a public university here in Kentucky, how are we moving Kentucky forward? And so as we work with policymakers, as we work with our local communities, we've worked hard to make sure that our university is powering our communities. I think if you think about the largest employment needs and the largest employers in most every community, from Paducah to Pikeville, we're producing graduates that work in those fields of study. Like you said, from education to healthcare to aerospace to social work to mental health, we're doing all those things.
What is the area that's the biggest challenge to attract and churn out graduates where they're needed?
Yeah, I think we've seen two areas that Eastern Kentucky University is known for that has kind of seen an ebb and flow. That's in nursing and education. And so we really saw a period of time pre-2020 where we had a downturn in education majors, and we saw students choosing other pathways. And then I think our schools have started to fill that. If we look across the state, a big shortage of teachers in a lot of disciplines. We've seen a nice rebound. The largest growing population of majors on our campus is education today. Similarly, I think even pre-pandemic, we started to see nursing, the demand for those degrees soften a bit. The pandemic, I think, accelerated that. It was a really hard time for healthcare workers. We've seen a rebound in that as well. And so we're hopeful that we'll continue to see students choosing education, nursing, those essential services as a degree pathway for them, because we know our communities need it.
What else did the pandemic change that has become something permanent on campus now, maybe?
Yeah, I think that one thing for us is thinking about online learning. And so it's not as though the pandemic created the online learning growth, but it definitely accelerated it. And I think it's taught us that we can deliver education, things that we thought we could not teach online, we can teach it online. Is it best online? I think that's for the student to decide. And so we try to meet them where they're at. But I will say we've seen exponential growth in online student growth, but we're full on campus. So we're going to open Keene Hall back up on campus, 582 brand new beds. It's completely full. And so we're going to have a vibrant on-campus experience, but we're also a major player in that online education space as well.
Yeah, speaking of, so residential campus is still very important and an important piece for EKU, right?
It is, and I think that the pandemic, seeing a group of students who came in who missed their senior prom, who missed their senior graduation, it really caused us to think about experiences on campus. And so this Eastern experience that we talk about was born out of that. I think we just announced last week that Flo Rida is going to be on campus for the kickoff this year. And so we're excited about that. So we are trying to create those unique experiences inside the classroom and outside the classroom for all of our students.
For our viewers, that Keene Hall is that big one that's as you enter campus off to the right. It's the big tower on campus. Right?
16 floors,
Yeah.
my home away from home. I lived in the 9th floor of Keene Hall. So.
You know, I did too, in different eras though. But but that's been quite a project.
It's been a great project. I think everyone wondered for the longest time had we taken all of the scaffolding on the East Coast to do that project, but it is now done. It's been a great project. We're excited to get it open and get students living there, and they're excited to be there.
The trend continues that more young women are going to college than young men. I know you're seeing that. What are your observations about that?
Well, 62% of our student body are females on campus. I think the big thing that we've got to think about is that our employers and our workforce have got to make sure that we're creating those natural pathways in those areas that are high demand. So, been partnering. We talked about Congressman Barr earlier. We have this STEM Goes Red event that we've worked on with him, focused on scholarships for young women who are working in who want to major in and work in STEM fields. Despite the fact that 62% of our students are females, only 36% of our STEM majors are women. And so I think we've got to continue to create those opportunities and make sure that no matter what you want to do, as the school of opportunity, there's a pathway there, and we want to support you to get to where you want to be.
Do you think the men will come back later, or is this a trend we're going to see?
Well, I think we've got to, I think that the past will teach us a lot about the future, and I think if we look at the cyclical trends, we will see that as the economy does well and there's high demand in certain fields, we'll see the impact of that in enrollment by gender. I think that as we perhaps start to see the economy change in some ways, where perhaps some of those sectors that are traditionally male dominated may slow down or become automated, I think we'll see a return of those students to campuses. Is that next year or the year after? Who knows? But I think we'll see it.
The Central Kentucky Regional Airport is in for more than $4 million in improvements, and that's where EKU's aviation program is based. Is that continuing to be a major growth area for Eastern?
Yeah, one of the fastest growing, and frankly, the $4.5 million is going to really address the general aviation side of what's going on. The Central Kentucky Regional Airport, that'll be the terminal in the general aviation space. We were fortunate that the General Assembly appropriated another significant amount of funds this year, $25 million, for us to go ahead and grow the flight program side as well. And so that program, flying over 400 students, we were all but at capacity there. But I think if you look up in the skies in Madison County on any given day, you'll see a Cessna 172 that says EKU on it flying around, and that is all day and all night as those students are doing that. But an exciting program for us, the only program of its kind in the state, and really one of the most affordable programs in America.
And so you'd pedal to the metal on that program, it sounds like. I mean, the more you can accommodate, the more you could probably graduate from that.
I think absolutely. I think the big key is flight time, making sure if the weather cooperates here in Kentucky, the more days that we get that are sunny skies and we can work with, the more days that students can get in the air and get those flight hours in. And so I think for us, that's really one of the and workforce. There is big demand for those flight instructors to not be flight instructors, to be pilots, for the regional carriers and for kind of working in the commerce of flying. But that's something we work through each and every day.
There was additional money in the state budget for Model Lab School. Do you have a plan and a timetable for construction? Now, you had an allocation in the budget prior to this one. Now this is more money.
It is. So obviously that project was bid out pre-COVID. COVID hits, price escalations. We were fortunate to get another round of funding to complete that project and make it whole. Our hope is to have over 1,000 students learning in that environment with the new school. We've now now that we've got the full funding, working with the architects to get that going. But our hope is to be in there in the new school space in 2028. We'll start to roll out some of those plans this fall with parents, with students, with our campus community. The big thing to remember is, why why does Eastern Kentucky University still have a lab school and we're the only one? It services so many of those degrees that you talked about, from school, from obviously our teachers, to our school psychologists, to our school nurses, to anyone who's working in a school working with children. Having that laboratory school really creates a unique experience for our post-secondary students who are learning at Eastern Kentucky University.
You want to build that right next to the current facility, right?
I think we are looking at locations right now, and so we have 2 locations we're looking at and hoping to come to a final decision with the architect sometime in the next couple months.
You had wanted to enroll with the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and it appeared to have real momentum early on. The House was almost unanimous and said, go for it. The state Senate tapped the brakes, as President Robert Stivers called it, says that more study is required. Where are things with that? So
CPE was tasked by the legislature to perform a study of not only our DO school proposal, but I think the vet school at Murray, the R2 PhD programs at Western, and I think engage the other campuses on what they may want to do for those kind of next niche programs. From my understanding, the RFP is out for the consultant who's going to do that study. I wouldn't call it a feasibility study. Maybe it's a needs study in that way, and so we've been working with them. We're very hopeful that they'll get somebody on board. I think they're due to deliver that report by December 1st, but I think if we look across our communities, only 43% of the most basic healthcare needs are being met by those general practitioners in our communities. As we look at where our distribution of people live and work, we see that over 40%, 47% of our fellow Kentuckians are living in rural communities, yet only less than 20% of our practitioners are practicing in those communities. So I think there's need, I think there's demand, and the thought of EKU being the public provider of osteopathic medicine degrees, I think is a real opportunity.
The legislature considered but did not pass legislation that would have outlawed or reined in diversity, equity, inclusion on campuses. They have had continuing discussions on that this summer. Morehead State and Northern Kentucky University's presidents testified and said that those efforts are necessary and are not that expensive. Your thoughts?
I think for us, if a student chooses Eastern Kentucky University for that opportunity to better themselves through education, I think we try our level best. I know we try our level best every day to be a community where any student who chooses us can find success there. And so at the end of the day, whatever we call our desire to try to make everyone feel like that they have a place on our campus, I think that we're committed to doing that work so as they can have student success. Keep the graduation rate up, keep the retention rate up, keep them moving forward, because finishing that degree is truly a transformative thing for them and those who come after them in that way. And so I think for us, as we look at building our campus community, I think we've just got to be focused on making sure that everyone feels like there's a place for them if they choose to come and be a part of our campus at EKU.
You have a new athletics director in place, right?
We do. Kyle Moats joins us. He is not an unfamiliar face or an unfamiliar name here in Kentucky. Worked at University of Kentucky for a significant period of time, worked at the University of Louisville. He came to us from Missouri State, having been the athletic director there for 15 years. And so we are eager to have him, over 30 years of experience, deep experience in really trying to position an institution to not only manage their resources in a really thoughtful and really intentional way, but also being aspirational in that. And so we're eager to have him here on campus. We're anticipating a really good year, a little disruptive as our basketball teams and volleyball teams are going to be out of Alumni Coliseum for the competition at least through January 1st.
For renovations.
And so for renovations. But what's on the other side of that is really exciting once we get those projects completed.
President David McFaddin from EKU, thanks for coming.
It's
really
great
appreciate it. Stay with us now. We'll be back in just a moment. Eric Gregory joined us from the Kentucky Distillers Association. We'll talk about the 25th anniversary of the Bourbon Trail and the growth of that industry. Kentucky Newsmakers will continue. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. Bourbon is said to be a $9 billion signature industry for Kentucky. It generates more than 23,000 jobs statewide. The Kentucky Bourbon Trail just celebrated its 25th anniversary, and the bourbon tourism industry continues to grow. So does the demand for the almost uniquely Kentucky creation, 95% of the world's bourbon made in Kentucky. A distillery being built in Moorhead will be the 87th such facility in Kentucky, so the growth continues. Eric Gregory is president of the Kentucky Distillers Association, and he joins us. Thanks for coming in.
Always a pleasure, Bill.
From the outside, it looks like a lot of signs of health and growth, in the bourbon industry and the bourbon tourism industry. Is that the case?
It is the case. $9 billion, as you said, 23,000 jobs, $1.63 billion in payroll and wages, and we've got another $3.5 billion in investment happening in the next 2 years. So we've surpassed 100 distilleries in Kentucky for the first time since the repeal of Prohibition, and by the end of 2025, 2026, I will have dozens more.
This Eastern Light facility in Moorhead is sort of an eastward expansion, and it is very interesting because it represents sort of a new multi-brand approach, right? What will be going on there?
I love it. Caleb Kilburn, the master distiller, is coming home to Eastern Kentucky, and when we had the groundbreaking, there were over 300 people there, excited to welcome bourbon into the community and the jobs and the investment and the year-round tourism that will bring. But they're part of a new breed of distillers that are focused on contract distilling. So they will help make brands for other distillers or other brands that need production and they don't have it themselves. That's always been the case in Kentucky. Your big distillers have always done that, but nowadays they can't keep up with the demand and the juice of their own. So they're looking to these contract distillers to help kind of relieve that pressure and also help people build brands and create dreams like Caleb's doing.
Does the maker keep somebody on site, through the process, or do they trust the employees of that facility?
I think you trust the employees of that facility. Yeah, I mean, these are experts. We've got 2 or 3 of these now in the state. You've got Kentucky Whiskey House in E-Town, obviously Bardstown Bourbon Company, which kind of revolutionized the whole process in Bardstown, and they've got incredible master distillers there who are well suited to produce anything you want.
Interesting concept. Last year, you were able, through strenuous lobbying efforts, to get the bourbon barrel tax lifted eventually. This is a very long-term phase-out. Communities depend on it, certainly. Do you feel that creates, or eventually will create, a more favorable environment for the bourbon industry in Kentucky, or do you worry that because it's a long-term phase-out, it remains somewhat of a challenge?
Yeah, a little bit of both. We're the only place in the world that taxes aging barrels of bourbon, and all we were asking for was a level playing field with every other manufacturer. You don't tax Camrys as they're going down the line. You wait until the car is sold. We are taxing bourbon every year it sits in that warehouse and ages. And the tax has been growing so fastly over the past few years that we are worried it's going to start hitting numbers in the hundreds of millions of dollars that would force distilleries into the difficult position of making choices to send those barrels out of state. And at some point, you're just going to send those barrels to southern Indiana, and as long as they're aged in Kentucky 1 year and age them there, and all that tax revenue is gone. So we worked with the legislature and local communities to create a 20-year phase-out. And the reason for that is we want to have people time to adjust. Communities have time to plan for the future, have time to take in the barrel tax they're getting now, which is more they've ever gotten before, and hopefully set a little bit of that back to help ease the transition. So it won't go away completely until the 2040s. I probably won't be around back then, but I'll definitely raise a glass when it goes away.
Does Kentucky squeeze what it can out of bourbon in terms of creating jobs, or are there aspects in which we could do more? I remember several years ago you talked about we could do more of the supporting products in Kentucky, and there's been some movement in that area, right?
There has, but yeah, we bourbonized just about anything you can imagine. Everything from tourism to hotels to tour companies, magazines, restaurants, bars, you name it. There's still a lot of supply chain, I think, that we can continue doing. We're finally getting some glass manufacturers in the state. There's one down in Bowling Green and some others that are looking to come in, and that was kind of the missing link because we have the cooperages here and we have the still makers here. So getting more and more people like that, and then keeping our farmers working. We're using more corn than ever before. So 20 million bushels of corn a year for our distilleries, and in some of these core distilling counties, that corn production is growing up 300%. So that's a very important part that I think we've seen a lot of growth into, to kind of keep that bourbon boom rolling on down the line.
Are distilleries able to get enough corn from Kentucky, or they have to go elsewhere?
A little bit of both. Yes, some of them get some from southern Indiana, and part of that is just from a diversity standpoint. So in case there was ever a drought or something that happened with your corn, you have a little bit of a backup just in case one area was affected. And some distillers have been using the same suppliers for 100 years, and they just don't want to change.
These days, a lot of consumers are environmentally conscious. You know, they're looking for sustainable products to buy and invest in, and don't want to be a part of it if it isn't. Is the bourbon industry moving adequately with that trend?
Yes, we can always do more. We can always do better. But we're looking at everything from the oak that we use in the barrels to glass recycling. In fact, Maker's Market's got a great program where you actually take the glass bottles down there and they'll pulverize them and reuse them in all sorts of different applications. But I think the best example of this is our white oak initiative that we're working on through the University of Kentucky. We obviously use a lot of white oak to make our barrels, and a lot of that comes from Kentucky, but a lot of it comes from the Ozarks. So in working with UK, they've actually decoded the genome for an oak tree because it takes 80 years to create a stave tree. So they decode that to see if they can find a tree that grows faster, that's more resistant to disease and things like that, so we can continue reforestation and use those sustainably. But I'm really proud of the distilleries for all the projects that they've got going on, everything from being carbon neutral distilleries and switching over to electric boilers and things like that, to everything they're doing with waste. Because, you know, we've always had leftover stillage, slop,
right.
It's called, and that goes to local farmers to feed their cattle. So we got a lot of happy cattle out there in Kentucky. So sustainability is one of our top priorities and the number one goal to keep on striving for.
There were concerns a few years ago that tariffs were hurting bourbon exports. Those were lifted eventually. Does the industry have to be watchful about political and world developments that could recreate a scenario like that?
Absolutely. I just got back from Geneva, where the KDA joined the World Spirits Alliance, and that's a group of other trade associations around the world and other manufacturers, not just bourbon, but we have scotch and tequila and others that were there. And we met in Geneva in order to meet with the embassies and the World Trade Organization to talk about tariffs and the damage those can do. Because when those were put on in 2018, we lost about $370 million a year in exports, which was more than half of our exports. And that pain continued, like you said, until they were delayed actually a couple of years ago. So if nothing's done, they're going to come back in March, and they're going to come back at double, 50%. So if we were losing $370 million at 25%, just imagine the damage that 50% is going to do to the industry. So we're doing everything we can. We've got a great partner in Governor Andy Beshear, who's tied into the Biden administration, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who was making a lot of calls on our behalf to try to get those lifted or stayed. And we're doing everything we can. But, you know, I think the election in November is going to decide a lot of that, maybe worldwide, and we'll have to wait and see.
But action would be required by, you say, March.
Yes, by March 31st.
Tariffs would return.
Right.
Isn't it interesting that people are fascinated enough with bourbon that there's this whole, as you said, tourism industry that has grown up around it. The 25th anniversary now of the Bourbon Trail, and it just keeps going and growing.
Who would have ever thought? You know, I mean, when I joined, it was 9 years in, and now we're here at 25, and we had 7 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, and now we just celebrated the 25th anniversary, and we have 46 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And it's really done a great job in helping build communities, because almost 80% of those visitors come in from out of state, and that's new money flowing into local restaurants, local hotels, local shops and stores. And you know, it's a way for the distilleries to kind of give back to the communities. They're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in these visitor centers to try to keep up with a more educated bourbon consumer. Let's just say that they always want more, and they want to go behind the scenes and things like that. So it's a phenomenon, a global bucket list phenomenon that I don't think we've ever seen the likes of.
Is it typical for people to spend several days? You know?
Yeah. We did a whole year's worth of research last year and had intercepts at all the distilleries and started asking people, how long are you here for, where'd you come, and everything else. And they typically spend 3 to 5 days at least here, and they're coming in packs of 2 to 4. They're trending younger, and get this, 63% of them have household incomes above $130,000. So they've got money to spend here in Kentucky, and we're glad they're spending it here in Kentucky. But with 46 distilleries, now we're forcing them to come back. So we want you to come and take your time and slow down and do some Kentucky Bourbon Trail Distilleries. Go back and tell your friends and your family, and then come back with more people and spend your time and your money here in Kentucky.
How do you see the bourbon industry moving forward in Kentucky as you have now some history to look back on, certainly, but as you look ahead, where do things go?
I think we still have a very bright future in Kentucky. Again, these distilleries have expert forecasters who have their crystal balls, and they look at where bourbon is heading, and they're spending billions of dollars in new distilleries, new visitor centers, new aging warehouses, and a lot of that is to meet that growing global demand for Kentucky bourbon. When we were in Geneva last week, we had bourbon on the bar, Kentucky bourbon on the bar, and it was one of the most popular products from everybody there around the world. So I think that popularity will continue, and if we could just get a few more free trade agreements in some places like India, where the tariff is 150% on American whiskey and Kentucky bourbon. If we could start to crack that code and get into a few more countries, there won't be enough bourbon in Kentucky to satisfy the demand. So I think we got a lot of opportunities out there in the global arena, and we're prepared to start making more.
Eric Gregory, thanks for coming by.
Yes,
we
sir.
appreciate
Thank
it as
you.
always.
Cheers.
Stay with us. We'll wrap up Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back, and before we go, what we have planned for next week's program, we'll be visiting with Lexington Mayor Linda Gorton, talking all things city in the summer and the months to come. And also our back-to-school theme will continue. Dr. Aaron Thompson will be here from the Council on Post-Secondary Education. He oversees all of Kentucky's colleges and universities and has some interesting trends to share with us. We do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. The news is always on at WKYT.com, on our WKYT News app, and of course our newscast to keep you informed. We hope you make it a good week ahead.